There are moments in life that split you in two. The person you were before that moment, and the person you had no choice but to become after it. Mine happened at my little sister's birthday party. In a room full of balloons, cake, and laughter, while everyone around me was clapping and celebrating, my father looked me dead in the eyes and made sure every single person in that room knew exactly what he thought of me. He thought it was funny. He thought I would just smile and take it the way I always had. What he didn't know, what none of us knew, was that someone else in that room was listening. Someone who had been watching our family for a very long time. And that man, my grandfather's oldest and dearest friend, was about to change the entire direction of my life. My name is Lily Rose, and this is the story I never thought I'd be brave enough to tell.
I grew up in a house that looked beautiful from the outside. That's the thing nobody tells you about certain kinds of pain. It lives inside perfectly normal-looking homes. Our house had a garden my mother tended every Sunday morning. It had a wide front porch with wooden chairs. It had wind chimes that sang in the summer breeze, and a welcome mat at the front door that said "Home Sweet Home" in faded letters. But homes aren't made of porches and wind chimes. Homes are made of the things that happen inside them when no one is watching. I was the oldest of two daughters. My sister Maya was 4 years younger than me, small and bright and loud in all the ways I was quiet. She had our father's laugh, his easy confidence, his way of walking into a room and immediately belonging there. People adored Maya. She made it look effortless. I was different. I was the kind of child who read too much and talked too little. I asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. I wanted to understand things, why the world worked the way it did, why people behaved the way they did, why certain things were considered right and others wrong. I was curious in a way that felt inconvenient to the people around me. My father had no patience for inconvenient things. His name was Gerald, though everyone called him Gary, and he was the kind of man who took up a lot of space without meaning to. Not physically, though he was tall. He just had a presence that settled over a room like weather. When he was in a good mood, the whole house felt lighter. When he wasn't, you could feel it the moment you walked in the front door, the way you can feel a change in pressure before a storm. I spent most of my childhood reading the weather. He wasn't cruel in the ways that leave obvious marks. He never raised his hand. But he had a particular gift, and I think on some level, he knew it was a gift he'd been given, the way some people are gifted at music or mathematics. He had a gift for finding the exact soft place inside a person and pressing down on it at precisely the wrong moment. With me, that soft place was my intelligence. Not because I lacked it. I didn't. My teachers had been telling my parents since I was 7 years old that I was an exceptionally bright child. I loved learning. I devoured books the way other kids devoured television. I had a natural ability to see patterns, to connect ideas, to think through problems in ways that surprised the adults around me. But my father had decided somewhere along the way that smart women were a particular kind of problem. I never fully understood why. Maybe it was the way he'd been raised. Maybe it was something that had happened to him that he never talked about. Maybe it was simply who he was, and there was no deeper reason behind it. All I knew was that every time I showed any sign of ability, every time a teacher praised me, every time I brought home a grade he should have been proud of, every time I said something that revealed how much I actually understood about the world, something in him reacted. Not with pride, with something closer to irritation, like my competence was an accusation of some kind. He had a nickname for me that he thought was lighthearted. He called me Professor, but not the way a father might call his daughter that, with warmth and admiration. He said it the way people say things when they want you to know they find you slightly ridiculous, with just enough of a smile that he could always claim he was joking if you said it stung. "Here comes the professor," he'd say when I walked into the kitchen. "Don't ask her a question unless you want a lecture." Everyone would laugh, even my mother, who was gentle and conflict-averse and chose always the path of least resistance with my father. I was very good at smiling. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had learned to be two different versions of myself depending on who was in the room. There was the Lily who existed in the wider world, capable, focused, building a career in nonprofit management, quietly earning the respect of people who had no reason to know my last name. And there was the Lily who came home for holidays and birthdays, who made herself smaller, who laughed at things that weren't funny, and stayed quiet about things that mattered. I thought that was just how it had to be. I thought that was the price of keeping the peace. I had no idea I was paying for something that had no end. The birthday party happened in April. Maya was turning 24. She wanted a family gathering. Nothing elaborate, she said, just the people who mattered most. Our parents, a few of our cousins, and our grandfather's oldest friend, a man named Henry Alderton, who had been a fixture in our family since before I was born. Henry was in his mid-70s at this point. He had been my grandfather's best friend for over 50 years. They had met in their 20s and had stayed close through everything: careers, marriages, losses, the quiet passage of decades. My grandfather had passed away 3 years before this story takes place, and Henry had never quite stepped back from our family after that. He came to things. He checked in. He sent cards on birthdays and asked real questions when he saw you. Not the kind people ask just to be polite, but the kind that told you he actually remembered what you'd said the last time. I had always liked Henry. He had that quality that very few people actually have. The quality of making you feel, when he looked at you, that he was genuinely interested in what was happening inside your mind. But on that particular April afternoon, I wasn't thinking about Henry. I was thinking about surviving the next 4 hours. The party was at my parents' house. I drove the 40 minutes there alone, which gave me time to prepare. Not in the way you prepare for something you're looking forward to, but in the way you prepare for something you've learned to get through. I ran through the mental checklist I always ran. Stay calm, don't get drawn into anything. Smile when you need to smile. Redirect conversations that start to feel sharp around the edges. Leave before it gets too late. I was good at this system. I'd been doing it for years. What I hadn't accounted for was the champagne. My father was in an excellent mood when I arrived. He and a couple of my cousins had been drinking since the early afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just enough to loosen the version of him that was already, on a normal day, a little too comfortable saying exactly what he thought. The party was lovely in that way parties sometimes are, before the moment that defines them. My mother had decorated the living room with soft pink streamers and small vases of white flowers. Maya was radiant. She'd worn a yellow dress and had her hair pinned up, and she moved through the room like someone who had never once in her life wondered whether she belonged anywhere. I watched her and felt, as I sometimes did, a complicated kind of love. Not jealousy, exactly, more like wonder. I genuinely didn't understand how she moved through the world so freely. I wanted that for her. I just had never quite figured out how to find it for myself. We ate, we laughed, my father made toasts. He was charming in the way he could be when he wanted to be, warm and funny and generous with his words. I let myself relax a little. I thought maybe today is just a good day. Maybe today we all just get to enjoy this. Then someone mentioned my work. It was my cousin Daniel. He was 26, the kind of young man who says things without quite thinking them through. Not out of malice, but out of a habit of talking before listening. He'd asked me a month or so before about the nonprofit I'd been working with, a small organization that worked on housing security for families in crisis. I'd mentioned that we'd recently secured a significant grant, the kind of funding that would let us expand our reach considerably. Daniel had apparently remembered this and brought it up now in the middle of dessert, with the bright energy of someone sharing good news. "Lily, didn't you say you guys got that big grant, the one you were working on for like a year? Did that come through?" It had. It had come through, and it had been the result of 18 months of work, writing proposals, building relationships with foundations, making the case over and over again for why this work mattered. It was the thing I was most proud of in my professional life at that point. It meant we could hire 3 more staff members. It meant we could serve twice as many families. I answered carefully, the way I always answered things at family gatherings, not diminishing it, but not making it into a bigger moment than the room could comfortably hold. Yeah, it did. It was a big deal for the organization. We're really grateful. "How much?" Daniel asked. I told him the number. There was a beat of silence, the kind that follows a number that's larger than people expected. And then, before anyone else could speak, my father laughed. It wasn't a quiet laugh. It was the full version, the one that fills a room. "Of course she got it," he said. "You know what Lily does, right? She talks. That's the job. She talks and she writes things down, and she goes to meetings, and then she comes home and tells everybody how important it all is." He was smiling as he said it, the smile that had always been the delivery mechanism for everything sharp. She's been almost changing the world for years now. She's got a real talent for almost. A few people laughed. Not everyone, but enough. My mother looked down at her plate. Maya went very still. She did that sometimes. My little sister, she went still when she didn't know what to do, like an animal sensing something wrong in the air. My cousin Daniel looked like he wished he had never said anything. I felt the room the way you feel a place when the temperature drops without warning. I smiled. I was so practiced at smiling. "Thanks, Dad," I said, and I picked up my fork. But my father wasn't finished. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was something about the fact that I hadn't flinched that made him push a little further. He always pushed further when I didn't flinch, as though my composure was itself a kind of challenge. "I'm serious, though," he said, leaning back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who has never once doubted his right to hold forth. "I worry about her, I do. She's brilliant. She'll tell you that herself. She'll sit here and explain exactly why, and with footnotes. But brilliance doesn't pay a mortgage, does it? You know what pays a mortgage? Results. Real ones. Not grant money from people who feel guilty about something." The room was quiet now. Not the comfortable quiet of people enjoying their dessert. The held-breath quiet of people waiting to see what happens next. "She could have done anything," he continued. "That's what I always said. This one could have done absolutely anything, and she chose," he gestured vaguely in my direction, "this." He said this the way you'd say nothing. I put my fork down, very carefully, the way you put something down when you're afraid of what your hands might do if you don't give them something deliberate to focus on. I didn't say anything. I had a whole life's practice of not saying anything in moments like this. I knew how to absorb it and let it pass through me and keep my face still and wait for the conversation to move on to something else. And it would have. It always had before. Except that Henry spoke. He hadn't said much through dinner. Henry was a man who listened more than he talked, which is rarer than it sounds, and which was one of the things my grandfather had always said he loved about him. He'd been sitting at the far end of the table, near the window, eating his cake with the unhurried manner of someone with nowhere else to be, and nothing to prove. When he spoke, his voice was measured and quiet and completely clear. "Gary," he said, "can I ask you something?" My father looked down the table at him, a little surprised. Henry had always been respectful and warm toward my father. He had never said anything that could be read as a challenge. "Sure, Henry," he said. "Go ahead." "Do you know what the Alderton Foundation funded this year?" A pause. "Your foundation?" "No, I don't think I do." "We funded 11 organizations working on housing security," Henry said. "Housing for families in crisis. Parents with children mostly. People who'd lost jobs, or had medical emergencies, or had just run out of road through no particular fault of their own. People who needed someone to believe their situation was worth investing in." My father nodded, a little uncertain now. "That sounds like good work." "It is," Henry said simply. "And one of those 11 organizations, the one whose grant proposal I personally spent the most time with, the one that made the clearest case I've read in years for why this kind of intervention matters, and exactly how the funding would be used, was your daughter's." The room went completely, perfectly still. I looked at Henry. He was looking at my father with the calm, unhurried expression of a man who has had a great deal of practice saying things that need to be said. "I didn't make the connection at first," he said. "Rose is a common enough name. But then I was at the site visit, and there she was, your Lily, running a meeting with 30 people in the room like she'd been doing it her whole life, answering every question, knowing every number. I watched her explain to a room full of skeptical foundation trustees exactly why this work mattered, and exactly why her organization was the right one to do it, and I thought to myself, Robert would have loved to see this." He paused. "Your father-in-law, my oldest friend. He would have been so proud of this girl." My father said nothing. For possibly the first time in my living memory, he had absolutely nothing to say. Henry looked at me then, just briefly, and he said in the same quiet voice, "You should know that the trustees asked me afterward, independently, what I thought of the proposal. I told them it was the strongest application we'd reviewed in 5 years. I told them the woman who wrote it understood the problem, understood the people affected by it, and had a plan that was specific and realistic and built on evidence. I told them I didn't think we could find a better use for the money."
He turned back to my father. Not unkindly, not triumphantly, just honestly. Results, he said gently. Real ones.
He looked at the table. Well, he said, and his voice had lost something, some of its easy fullness, some of its weather. I didn't know that. No, Henry said, I know you didn't. And then he picked up his fork again and continued eating his cake.
And the conversation moved on, and the party continued, and the wind chimes rang softly outside the window. But something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a change in season, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the air itself, in the quality of the light. For the first time in a room with my father, I had not had to defend myself. Someone had simply told the truth, quietly, without theater, without making it into more than it needed to be, and that had been enough. I helped my mother clear the dishes after dessert. Maya came and found me in the kitchen and wrapped her arms around me from behind, the way she used to when we were kids. She didn't say anything. She just held on for a moment, and that was enough too. My father found me before I left. He was standing by the front door, and he looked different somehow. Smaller, maybe, though that's not quite the right word. Just less certain than he usually looked. He said, I didn't know about Henry's foundation. I know, I said. You could have told me. I thought about that for a second. About all the things I could have told him, over all the years I'd been his daughter. About all the moments I'd chosen silence instead, choosing to absorb rather than to speak, choosing to protect the peace at the cost of something in myself. I probably could have, I said, but I think I needed someone else to say it. He nodded. He didn't hug me, which was fine. We weren't that kind of family in that particular way, and one afternoon wasn't going to change the architecture of 20-some years. But he looked at me, really looked at me, the way he almost never did, and he said, You've done good work. 3 words, 4 syllables, the most ordinary sentence in the world. I drove home in the dark with the windows down and the spring air moving through the car, and I thought about my grandfather. About the man who had been Henry's best friend for 50 years, who had always believed in me without reservation, who had died 3 years ago and left a space in my life that nothing had quite filled. I thought about how the things we do, the real things, the quiet, faithful work we do when no one is watching, have a way of eventually being seen. Not always in the ways we hope, not always in the rooms we would choose, not always by the people we most want to impress, but seen. My grandfather used to say that integrity was what you did with the gifts you were given when the room was empty. He meant it about character, but I think he also meant it about the kind of work that doesn't come with applause, the kind of work you do because it matters and because you're the person who knows how to do it. I had been doing that work for years, in relative quiet, and I had told myself that the quiet was fine, that I didn't need the recognition, that the work was enough, and the work was enough. That part was true. But what Henry had given me that afternoon wasn't recognition exactly. It was something simpler and more important. He had given me back a piece of myself that I had left in that kitchen years ago. Somewhere between one smile I hadn't meant and another silence I hadn't chosen. He had given me the gift of being seen clearly. In the weeks that followed the birthday party, things shifted in the way that quiet things shift, slowly and without announcement. My father didn't transform overnight. That's not how people work, and I wouldn't want you to think this story has that kind of ending, because those endings aren't real, and this story is. He was still in many ways the same man he had always been. He still had opinions about everything, and shared them without being asked. He still had the weather quality, the way a room changed when he was in it. But something in how he looked at me was different. Something had been recalibrated. He asked me, a few weeks later, about a presentation I was giving at a regional conference. Maya had mentioned it to him, and he'd asked her to ask me to tell him how it went. When I called to tell him, he listened. Not perfectly, not without interrupting a few times, but he listened. Henry invited me to coffee the month after the birthday party. We sat in a small cafe near his office, the kind of place with leather chairs and tall windows, and a specific quality of afternoon light that makes conversations feel more serious than they might otherwise be, and he told me about my grandfather.
He told me stories I hadn't heard. Things from their 20s, from their years of building their careers, from the moments my grandfather had doubted himself, and the moments he had been more certain than the facts warranted. He talked about my grandfather the way you talk about someone you've had the privilege of knowing completely, not just the best version of them, but all of it, the whole complicated person. And then he said, he talked about you constantly, you know. Your sister too, of course, but you specifically. He used to say that of all the people in his family, you were the one who reminded him most of himself. Not because you were like him on the surface, but because of the way you thought. He said you both had the same way of caring about things that mattered, even when it would have been easier not to. I had to look out the window for a moment. He worried about you too, Henry said gently. He saw the way things were between you and your father. He talked to me about it more than once. He used to say he wished he knew how to fix it, and he never quite did. He didn't need to fix it, I said. No, but he wanted to. I've been thinking about a position at the foundation, he said. Director level. Someone who understands how to build the case for this kind of work. Housing, family stability, the intersection of crisis intervention and long-term outcomes. Someone who knows the field from the inside and can represent it to the people who hold the resources. He paused. I've been thinking it for a while, before the party even, but the party confirmed it. I stared at him. I know it's a different kind of role than what you're doing now, he said. More visibility, more pressure, a larger platform, which means larger stakes. I thought you should know it exists, and that you're the person I'm thinking of. I thought about my grandfather, who would have sat in a leather chair in a place just like this one, turning an idea over in his hands, the way he used to turn things over, slowly, seriously, without rushing toward a conclusion. I thought about all the rooms I had made myself small in, all the tables I had sat at and said less than I knew, and smiled at things that weren't funny, and absorbed what was thrown at me like weather. I thought about a birthday party in April, and a man at the end of the table eating his cake, and 3 words that had never been said before in a room where they needed to be said. I thought, you cannot build a life on the permission of people who have never understood you. And I thought, you can accept the recognition of someone who sees you clearly, not because you need them to see you, but because being seen clearly is one of the great gifts one person can give another. I'd like to hear more, I said. Henry smiled. It was the same smile I had seen at the party. Quiet, unhurried, certain. I was hoping you'd say that. I went home that evening, and I sat on my apartment floor with my back against the couch, and I let myself feel, for a little while, all the things I had been managing so carefully for so long. The tiredness of the smiling, the weight of the years of weather reading, the particular grief of being someone who had always known what she was capable of, and had spent too many years in rooms where that knowing had to be kept quiet. And then I let myself feel something else, something smaller and newer, and a little unfamiliar, something that felt like the beginning of being free. Not free from my family. I want to be clear about that, because that's not what this story is about. I love my family, all of them, including my father, in the complicated and sometimes painful way that you love people who have hurt you without meaning to, and perhaps without even knowing. Freedom isn't always the absence of something. Sometimes it's just the arrival of yourself. I think about my grandfather a lot. I think about the 50-year friendship that produced a man like Henry, the friendship that meant, in some indirect and beautiful way, that my grandfather was in that room at the birthday party, listening, the way he had always listened. I like to think he got a vote somehow. I like to think that's what Henry was, not just his best friend, but his last gesture of love toward a granddaughter he had believed in completely. Some things we don't get to know for certain. Some things we just hold carefully, like something fragile and irreplaceable. My grandfather used to say, do the work. Do it faithfully, and do it well, and do it especially when the room is empty and no one is watching. The world has a way of noticing the things done faithfully in empty rooms. He was right. He was, as it turned out, completely right. And somewhere out there, I hope he knows it. If you've ever sat at a table where you were made to feel small, if you've ever smiled through something that hurt and told yourself the peace was worth the cost, I hope this story gave you something. Not a solution, not an answer, just the reminder that the things you do faithfully in the empty rooms of your life are never as invisible as they feel. My name is Lily Rose, and I'm still doing the work. Now, before I go, I'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching this right now, and what time is it there? Drop a comment below and tell me. I genuinely love reading them, every single one. Has someone ever defended you in a moment when you had completely stopped expecting anyone to? And how did it change you? If this story stayed with you even a little, hit subscribe and come back. There are more stories like this one waiting for you here, every week on Lily Calm Stories.